The morning sun painted golden streaks across Marcus Webb's pristine backyard pool, the water so clear you could see the drain grates 20 feet down. He stood at the sliding glass door with his coffee, inhaling the peace of a Saturday that belonged entirely to him. His ex-wife had the kids this weekend. The house was silent. The pool was perfect. He didn't hear her car arrive. Marcus had only lived in Meadowbrook Heights for 8 months, a quiet subdivision where everyone nodded hello and kept their distance. The way suburbs were supposed to work. Except for Karen Mitchell from 3 doors down. Karen, who had somehow decided that the Webb household was an extension of her own personal empire. The first invasion happened in July. Marcus came home from a work conference to find her in his pool with her 2 teenagers, laughing like they owned the place. When he confronted her, she laughed harder. "Oh, come on, Marcus. We're neighbors. The chlorine is good for my skin." The second time, he installed a camera. The footage showed her checking the side gate, which he'd left unlocked once, and walking in like she was visiting a public park. When he asked why she hadn't knocked, she said, "I didn't want to bother you." The third time, Marcus had politely but firmly told her the pool was off-limits without an invitation. Karen had stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "That's very unfriendly, Marcus. My kids have nowhere to swim." He hadn't said what he was thinking. There's a community center 4 blocks away. Now, on this quiet Saturday in September, as Marcus sipped his cooling coffee and felt the tension in his shoulders, he heard it, the metallic creak of his side gate. Through the fence slats, he caught the silhouette, Karen again. She was in white, a linen sundress that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly car payment, and she had her phone in hand, taking photos of the pool like she was location scouting for a magazine spread. Behind her came her daughter, Brittany, 17 and glued to her own phone, and trailing behind was Karen's sister, Rachel, who looked exactly like Karen but angrier, if that was possible. Marcus set down his coffee. He'd been calm about this 3 times. He'd been reasonable. He'd been neighborly. There was a 4th option, and he'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing for it. He opened the sliding door and stepped onto the pool deck. "Karen." She jumped, pressing her hand to her chest. "Jesus, Marcus, you scared me. I was just going to leave you a note." "My gate is locked now," Marcus said, his voice flat. "It's been locked since Tuesday." Karen's face shifted through several expressions. Surprise, annoyance, then a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, obviously I have my reasons for being here. I'm actually doing you a favor, really. My sister Rachel is a lawyer, a real lawyer, not like what I do, and she wanted to see your pool because we think there might be some liability issues you should know about." Rachel stepped forward, her smile identical to Karen's. "Homeowners insurance doesn't actually cover neighborhood kids using your pool without permission. It's a gray area." "It's not a gray area," Marcus interrupted, "and you're trespassing." "Trespassing?" Karen's voice climbed an octave. "That's a very strong word for someone just trying to be friendly, for someone whose neighborhood has made me feel very unwelcome." "You're welcome in my home," Marcus said carefully, "with an invitation which you haven't had 3 times. Brittany looked up from her phone, momentarily engaged by the drama. Karen pressed her lips together, and Marcus saw the calculation happening behind her eyes, the moment where she decided how much of a scene to make. "You know what?" Karen said, her voice becoming cold in a way it hadn't been before. "I came here to tell you that the neighborhood is talking about you. They think you're rude. They think you're actually the unfriendly one. I've been sticking up for you, Marcus. I've been telling people you're going through something, but maybe they're right." The words landed softly, but Marcus felt their weight. In a suburb like this, reputation was currency. He could see how this would play out. Karen mentioning casually at book club that Marcus was strange and unwelcoming, and slowly he'd become the neighborhood pariah. The guy who yelled at Karen Mitchell for bringing her kids to swim. "I appreciate you sticking up for me," he said, and he meant it. "But I need you to understand that you can't use my pool without asking. That's not unfriendly. That's normal." Karen's expression hardened. "Fine, I'll ask then. Can my family use your pool?" It was a trap. Either he said yes and opened himself up to her using this as precedent, or he said no and was the bad guy. "Not today," Marcus said. "You need to leave." For a moment he thought she might refuse. She was the type who'd make a scene, call the police and report him for something vague. But then Brittany said, "Come on, Mom." and Rachel checked her phone with exaggerated disinterest, and Karen took one last look at the pool like it had personally offended her. "Your loss," she said. "Your property taxes don't reflect the value you should be bringing to this community." Marcus watched them leave, watched Karen check the gate behind her the way she always did, probably calculating if she'd missed an opportunity to get inside again. He waited until her white Range Rover pulled away from the curb before he stepped back inside. His hands were shaking. He set his coffee down and opened his laptop, pulling up the link to the industrial supplier he'd been researching. The product was called PlastiGel-X, a temporary non-toxic adhesive used in manufacturing and construction. It dried clear, was waterproof, and created a grip so strong that separating objects became nearly impossible without solvent, which he'd also ordered, just in case. The product was rated safe for skin contact. It would wash off, it would sting, it would terrify. Marcus had ordered it on impulse 3 days ago before Karen's last invasion, when he'd reached the end of whatever rope he'd been holding. But he'd convinced himself he wouldn't actually use it. He wasn't that person. The next week passed in a strange kind of limbo. Marcus went to work, came home, and didn't see Karen or her Range Rover. He told himself this was good. He told himself he was normal again. But every night he'd walk past his home office and see the small box on his desk. PlastiGel-X. 3 containers, enough to coat his pool in a thin, invisible layer that would activate on contact with skin. The solvent sat next to it in an amber bottle, innocuous and waiting. He read and reread the instructions, the safety data sheet, the warnings. Non-toxic, water-soluble with the included solvent. Used safely in dental work, in manufacturing, in scientific applications. It would cause discomfort. The instructions were clear about that, but it wouldn't cause harm. Marcus wasn't stupid. He knew what he was thinking about doing was crossing a line. But he also knew that Karen would be back. It was only a matter of time. And when she was, he'd catch her in the act of trespassing, and there would be evidence, literal evidence stuck to her skin and clothes. It was genius, really. It was perfect. It was insane. On Wednesday night, Marcus prepared. He waited until midnight and opened both containers of PlastiGel-X. The substance was milky white, almost like watered-down paint. Using a paint roller he'd bought specifically for this purpose, he applied it carefully across the entire shallow end of the pool, the part where Karen and her kids always swam. He kept the deep end untouched, creating a visible line at the 7-foot mark. The instructions said it would set in approximately 45 minutes. He timed it, 12:47 a.m. By 1:35 a.m., the pool's surface was dry to the touch, though the gel remained invisible. To the eye, the pool looked exactly the same. Marcus stood in the darkness of his backyard, sweating despite the cool night air. What he'd just done was criminal. He knew this. The word kept cycling through his mind: felony, assault, reckless endangerment. Those were the possibilities. He went inside and slept fitfully, dreaming of Karen's face contorted in pain, of her suing him, of police cars with lights flashing red in his driveway. Thursday passed, nothing. Friday, nothing. Marcus found himself both relieved and disappointed. Maybe she'd gotten the message. Maybe she'd finally understood that she wasn't welcome. By Saturday morning, he was almost ready to neutralize the pool with the solvent when he heard it, the metallic creak of the gate. But it wasn't Karen. It was Sarah Chen, his other neighbor, the one who lived on the opposite side from Karen. Sarah was 42, divorced, and had an 8-year-old son named Tommy who'd asked weeks ago if he could swim in Marcus's pool sometime. Marcus had said yes, genuinely, because Sarah had asked, because that's how human interaction was supposed to work. "I hope this is still okay," Sarah called out, holding Tommy's hand. "You said any time, and the weather's so beautiful, and I really didn't think." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "Actually," he said, his voice coming out strange, "not today. The pool, I just treated it. Chemicals, give it like 24 hours. It wasn't entirely a lie. There were chemicals in the water." Sarah's face fell. "Oh, okay, well, tomorrow then." "Sure," Marcus said, lying through his teeth. "Tomorrow." He watched her leave, Tommy dragging his feet, and felt something break inside him. This wasn't the plan. Tommy wasn't Karen. Sarah wasn't trespassing, they'd asked. Marcus went to the pool, opened the amber bottle of solvent, and dumped it all in. The instructions said the solvent would deactivate the gel within minutes of contact with the water. He watched the surface. waiting for some visible change, some way to know that his booby trap had been neutralized. There was nothing. The pool looked the same. By evening, he drained the pool entirely and refilled it just to be sure. Then he made a decision. He would neutralize the whole thing. Whatever had made him think this was acceptable had been a moment of insanity. He wasn't a person who rigged traps. He wasn't a villain. But on Sunday morning, when he heard the gate again, he didn't refill the pool. He drained it, yes, but only halfway. And he'd reapplied a fresh layer of Plasti-Gel-X, careful and precise. Insane. He was insane. This time it was Karen. She was alone. No Brittany, no Rachel. Just Karen in a blue one-piece swimsuit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly car payment, her blonde hair in a pristine bun, carrying a rolled towel and wearing the expression of someone who decided to claim something they'd always been entitled to. "I'm invoking the general use clause," she announced as she approached the pool, not bothering to look at Marcus, who stood frozen on the deck. "I've been a neighbor here for 5 years. I've established a pattern of peaceful access. That makes this a customary use situation. Legally speaking, you can't just shut me out." "There is no general use clause," Marcus said quietly. "According to my sister, there might be." Karen was already pulling her dress over her head, revealing her swimsuit. "She's sending me the statute, and even if I'm wrong, the worst that happens is you sue me, and you won't because you don't want the drama." She was right, he didn't want the drama, but he also didn't want her in his pool. Karen walked to the shallow end, testing the water with her foot. "Still a little cold," she said, and then she dove in. It started as a shriek of surprise, the kind of noise people make when something unexpected happens, but it transformed almost immediately into something else: panic, confusion, pain. Karen thrashed, her hands coming up out of the water, and Marcus watched in real time as the Plasti-Gel-X did its job. The gel activated on contact with her skin, bonding instantly. Her hands stuck together. When she tried to separate them, she couldn't. Panic had her thrashing harder now, and Marcus watched as more of her body came into contact with the gel. Her legs stuck to the sides of the pool. Her shoulder adhered to the surface. Her hair, still wet, began sticking to her face in a way that looked like it hurt. What is?" Karen gasped, her voice cracking between screams. She was treading water, but barely, her limbs bound in increasingly unnatural positions as the gel did its work across her entire body. Marcus, help me, something's wrong." He'd known it would be shocking, he'd known she'd be frightened. But watching the reality of it unfold before him, Marcus felt something he hadn't anticipated: guilt. Massive, crushing guilt. But he didn't move, couldn't move. I can't move my hands." Karen was crying now, her voice breaking into sobs. Please help me, I don't know what's happening." The rational part of Marcus's brain was screaming at him to get the solvent, to undo this, to make it stop. But another part, the part that had spent months of weekday evenings watching her car pull into his driveway, of dealing with her dismissals and her games and her weaponization of the neighborhood social structure, that part was watching. Karen's eyes found his, and in that moment he saw genuine fear. Not the manipulative fear of someone playing a game. Real, primal terror. "Marcus, please," she whispered. "Please help me." He moved. Grabbing the towels from the deck chair, he'd placed them within arm's reach the night before, prepared for exactly this. Marcus moved to the edge of the pool. "Stay calm," he said, and was shocked by how normal his voice sounded. "You've made contact with an adhesive. It's non-toxic. It will wash off with solvent." Why would you?" Karen's voice was hoarse. She'd stopped thrashing, understanding now that violence wasn't going to help her. She was treading water in a strange, contorted position, her limbs stuck to themselves and to the pool's surface. You did this on purpose." "I did," Marcus confirmed. He held up the amber bottle. "This is the solvent. It'll take about 5 minutes to fully activate once it comes into contact with the gel." "You're insane," Karen whispered. "You're actually insane." "Maybe," Marcus said, and then he dumped the solvent directly into the pool. Within seconds, Karen felt it working. The adhesive was releasing her in stages, and each release was accompanied by a sob of relief or a gasp of pain as her skin was suddenly free to move again. By the time she made it to the shallow end and was able to stand, she looked like she'd survived something. Her skin was red where the gel had made contact, not burned but irritated. Her hair was matted. Her makeup was running down her face in rivers. She was gasping, breathing hard, and her hands were shaking as she waded to the deck. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice still shaking. "I'm calling a lawyer. I'm calling. You're going to regret this. You're going to." But she didn't finish, because standing in the sliding glass door, his face pale with shock, was David Mitchell, Corinne's ex-husband. Marcus had never met him, had never heard much about him, only that he'd left Corinne 5 years ago and was still involved in the kids' lives. He was wearing a polo shirt and khaki pants, and he was holding a Tupperware container that, Marcus suddenly realized, he must have brought to pick up the kids, who were supposed to be with their mother this weekend. David's eyes moved from Marcus to his ex-wife, dripping and gasping and covered in the aftermath of Marcus's trap. "What the hell happened?" David asked. "He attacked me," Corinne said immediately, her voice taking on a different quality, the quality of someone who understood she needed to sound like a victim. "He put something in the pool, an adhesive. He trapped me in there on purpose." David's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something darker. He set down the Tupperware and stepped toward Marcus. "Is that true?" he asked quietly. Marcus considered lying. He considered saying Corinne was confused, that she'd imagined it, that she'd had some kind of allergic reaction. But he was tired. He was tired of lying. He was tired of pretending to be a person he wasn't. "Yes," Marcus said, "it's true." David's fist came up and Marcus didn't try to dodge it. The punch caught him on the cheekbone and he tasted blood immediately. He fell backward, striking the edge of the lounge chair, and for a moment the sky spun above him. When his vision cleared, David was standing over him, fist clenched, breathing hard. "She's my kid's mother," David said, his voice low. Whatever she did to you, you don't get to do that to her." Marcus sat up slowly, touching his cheek and coming away with blood on his fingers. He probably deserved worse. He certainly deserved this. From the pool, Corinne was pulling herself the rest of the way out, still gasping, still shaking. She grabbed for the towel, and when David saw her distress, he moved to her instead of back to Marcus. "Are you okay? Can you stand? We need to get you to the hospital." "I think I'm okay," Corinne said, and Marcus realized something then. She was going to play this perfectly. She was going to be the victim, and David was going to believe her, and everyone would believe her, because this looked like assault. This looked like a man who'd rigged a trap for a woman. The fact that she'd invaded his home 8 times didn't matter. The fact that he'd tried to ask her nicely, and she'd refused, didn't matter. The fact that she'd weaponized their neighborhood connection against him didn't matter. What mattered was that David's hands were on Corinne's shoulders, looking at her like she was made of glass, and he was already dialing his phone. "Police," David said into the receiver. "I need to report an assault. My ex-wife was attacked by her neighbor. Yes, she's injured. No, I don't think she needs an ambulance, but we should probably have her checked out. The address is..." And as David gave the address, Marcus got to his feet and made a decision. He wasn't going to stick around for this. He wasn't going to let David finish the call, wasn't going to let police show up and ask him questions and take his statement and all the rest of it. He was guilty. He knew it, and he didn't trust that any explanation he gave would matter. He walked into his house, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood floor. He grabbed his wallet and keys from the kitchen counter, and then he left through the front door just as David was hanging up the phone. 3 hours later, sitting in a motel room 60 miles away from Meadowbrook Heights, Marcus turned on his phone and watched his life disintegrate in real time. Corinne had already posted about it. Not explicitly, she was too smart for that, but the implication was there, just had the scariest experience of my life. Thank God my ex was there. Some people really do show their true colors, grateful for neighbors who actually care about community safety. The post had 200 likes already. People he'd seen at the grocery store, neighbors he'd nodded hello to, all of them under her comment with heart emojis and prayer hands. Then came the news alert. Local man accused of assault in Meadowbrook Heights, police investigating. There was no name yet, but it was only a matter of time. His phone rang. It was his ex-wife, Jennifer. "Tell me this isn't about you," she said without preamble. "It's complicated." "It's not complicated. It's on the news. The kids are asking why their dad is being called a criminal, so uncomplicated for me." Marcus told her everything. The invasions, the frustration, the ridiculous escalation, his neighbor's refusal to respect boundaries, the adhesive, the trap. Jennifer listened in silence, and when she was done, she said, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and I'm saying this as someone who's seen you do a lot of dumb things." She wouldn't stop. "I don't care, you could have called the cops. You could have put up a sign. You could have actually talked to her directly instead of this." Jennifer's voice rose. "This psycho booby-trap nonsense. Do you understand what you've done? Do you understand that now I might not have custody of our kids because their father is a lunatic?" The words hit harder than David's fist had. "Jen, I don't want to hear it. I've retained a lawyer. My lawyer is separating your actions from my parenting immediately. You'll need your own lawyer, and you need to come back and face this because running makes you look guilty." "I am guilty." "Of bad judgment, yes. Of assault, we'll find out. But the lawyer says the adhesive being non-toxic and water-soluble might actually work in your favor. Might, if you show remorse and take responsibility." Jennifer hung up before he could respond. The news cycle accelerated. By evening, a local anchor was standing in front of his house, explaining to viewers that Marcus Webb, a 42-year-old software architect, had allegedly rigged a booby trap in his backyard pool as retaliation against a neighbor who had been using the pool without permission. The neighbor, Corinne Mitchell, had suffered mild chemical burns and emotional trauma. Mild chemical burns. The adhesive wasn't caustic. The instructions specifically said it wouldn't burn. But pain was pain, and fear was fear, and the narrative was already written. His lawyer, Margaret Chen, recommended by Jennifer, called him at 11 p.m. "You need to come back," she said without preamble. "Tonight, if possible, tomorrow morning at the latest." "What are the charges?" "Currently, they're not pressing charges. They're just investigating, but if you run, that changes. Then they can charge you with assault and fleeing. You understand the difference?" Marcus understood. "What if I turn myself in, cooperated fully?" "That's the smart play," Margaret said. "We go to the station together, you give a statement, you express remorse, and you better feel remorse because if you don't, a jury will see that. We mitigate. We argue proportionality. The fact that it was non-toxic helps. The fact that you can prove she was trespassing helps." "She says I attacked her." "People always say that when they don't want to admit they screwed up. Don't worry about what she says. Worry about what the evidence shows." The evidence, the pool security camera, the footage of Corinne entering without permission, the timestamp, the records of his attempts to ask her to stop. But also the Plastigel X, the preparation, the premeditation, the deliberateness. And the footage of him pouring the solvent into the pool while Corinne was in it. "I'm fucked," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe," Margaret said, "but you're fucked in a way that's survivable. Cooperate, show remorse, and we work with that. Run, and you're fucked in a way that destroys you." Marcus drove back through the night. The sun was rising over Meadowbrook Heights when he pulled into his driveway to find 3 police cars waiting for him. Part 5, The Reckoning. The interrogation room was small, white, and fluorescent lit in a way that made everyone inside look guilty. Marcus sat across from Detective James Morrison, a man in his 50s with the exhausted expression of someone who'd seen every permutation of human stupidity and been disappointed every time. "Walk me through it again," Morrison said, not unkindly. "From the beginning." Marcus walked through it. The invasions, the frustration, the decision to set the trap, the application of the gel, the waiting, Corinne's arrival. "You knew she would use the pool?" Morrison asked. "I suspected." "And you set a trap knowing that someone would likely be harmed?" "I set a trap knowing that someone would be frightened and uncomfortable," Marcus said carefully. "I ordered the materials because they were non-toxic. I included solvent. I was trying to scare her into respecting my property rights." "By assaulting her?" "By using a non-toxic substance to demonstrate that her behavior had consequences." Morrison nodded like this was what he expected to hear. "The thing is, Mr. Webb, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never understood the logic of trying to solve a problem by making it worse. You know what I would have done?" Marcus shook his head. "I would have called the cops, multiple times. I would have pressed charges for trespassing. I would have called a lawyer and gotten a cease and desist. I would have installed fence with a lock and called it a day. But what I wouldn't have done is chemically trap my neighbor in a pool and then pour solvent on her." "The solvent was the antidote," Marcus said. "It was supposed to make the adhesive come off." And if she'd had a panic attack and gone under while it was working? What if she'd had a heart condition and the stress triggered something? What if? Morrison leaned back. You made a dangerous assumption about how a human being would react to being stuck in water. That's called reckless endangerment. She's fine, Marcus said. She's fine physically, Morrison said. Emotionally is another story. And that was the moment Marcus saw the footage. Morrison pulled up the video on a laptop, and Marcus watched from an angle he hadn't considered. Karen from her phone, which she'd been recording with during her Instagram story. The footage showed her point of view as she dove in, hit the adhesive, panicked, screamed, and then looked up to see Marcus standing on the deck. Not rushing to help, not immediately offering aid, just watching. Streaming conscious awareness, Morrison said quietly. The adhesive scared her, yes, but what scared her more was your face, that calm expression, that willingness to let her suffer for what she thought was a second or two. Marcus realized he'd made a mistake, a fundamental, catastrophic mistake. He'd assumed that once Karen was in the pool, the rational part of her brain would kick in, that she'd understand it was non-toxic, that she'd calm down and wait for him to help. But he'd also stood there, calm and collected, while a woman suffocated in water and fear. We're charging you with reckless endangerment and assault, Morrison said. If you want to argue it was a prank gone wrong, that's between you and your lawyer. But from where I'm sitting, you tried to teach a lesson and ended up looking like someone capable of worse. 6 months later, Marcus sat in a community college classroom wearing a name tag that said M. Webb instead of using his full first name. He'd taken a plea deal, 4 months in county jail, 2 years probation, and 600 hours of community service. The assault charges had been reduced to reckless endangerment, which meant he wasn't a registered offender. He could still work, he could still have a life, but everything was different. The job at his software firm had evaporated when the news broke. His name was unhireable. Jennifer had managed to keep shared custody of the kids, but she'd established strict boundaries. He needed to be in therapy, needed to demonstrate emotional regulation, and could only see them on supervised visits for the first 2 months. He was working on rebuilding that trust. The house in Meadowbrook Heights had sold at a loss. Karen's legal team had filed a civil suit for damages, emotional distress, medical expenses, for the irritated skin, and loss of enjoyment of her property, because apparently she was worried about swimming now and needed therapy. The suit was for $150,000, and Marcus's insurance wasn't covering it because he deliberately set the trap. His lawyer thought he could settle for $45,000. It was a fraction of his savings. But none of that was the worst part. The worst part was that Karen had won. She'd positioned herself as the victim of an unhinged man who tried to hurt her. Meadowbrook Heights had circled the wagons around her. She'd become the neighborhood's heroine for staying strong and not letting this define her. Her Instagram had grown to 47,000 followers, mostly from people who'd read about the case and wanted to support her. Marcus had become a cautionary tale. He was sitting in statistics class, barely paying attention to a lecture on probability theory, when his phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert. Swimming pool boundaries case inspires new legislation. State lawmakers discuss trespassing and self-defense laws. The article quoted Karen extensively. She talked about how she'd been violated and how property rights shouldn't supersede human compassion. She talked about how she'd forgiven Marcus because she was a better person than this situation tried to make her. She talked about how she'd started a nonprofit called Community Access Now that advocated for the dismantling of gates and walls between neighbors. Marcus nearly laughed. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. But then he read the next part, and the laughter died. According to the article, Karen's nonprofit was already gaining traction. They'd gotten the town council to approve a community recreation agreement that would allow supervised public access to private pools during summer months. They were pushing back against what they called privatization of joy. And they'd specifically mentioned Marcus's case as an example of what happens when property rights trump human connection. So Karen had taken his attempt to enforce boundaries and turned it into a movement. She'd become an advocate. She'd made money, gained followers, and improved her life by positioning herself as a victim of his overreach. And Marcus had made himself a criminal in the process. He left the classroom and sat outside on a bench, staring at his phone. In the comments section of the article, people were debating. Some agreed with Karen. Some thought Marcus had been right to protect his property. Some thought they'd both been wrong. But what struck Marcus was one comment in particular from someone who'd written, "They both seem insane. He traps her in adhesive, she turns it into a crusade. This is what happens when people stop talking to each other." The person was right. Somewhere between Karen's invasions and his chemical trap, they'd both stopped being reasonable. They'd both chosen escalation. And now they were both defined by this moment forever. Marcus pulled out his phone and texted his lawyer. "How much longer until I can request a change of terms on the probation?" The response came quickly. "After a year of clean behavior, you're 6 months in. Why having second thoughts?" Marcus wasn't sure what he was having. Regrets, definitely. Understanding of his own capacity for cruelty, absolutely. But also something else. A strange sense of clarity about the fact that no amount of remorse was going to undo what he'd done, and no amount of success was going to make Karen feel anything other than victorious. He'd set a trap for a woman who wouldn't respect his boundaries. She'd been hurt. He'd gone to jail. She'd become famous. And somehow, through it all, neither of them had learned the lesson they were supposed to learn. That night, Marcus did something he hadn't allowed himself to do since the arrest. He looked up Karen Mitchell on Instagram. Her most recent post was from the pool at her new house, a bigger house, presumably funded by legal settlements or nonprofit donations. The caption read, "Teaching my kids about respecting others' spaces while honoring our shared humanity. It's a balance. Community access, property rights, forgiveness." The photo showed her 2 children playing in the pool while she stood on the deck, beautiful and serene. Marcus stared at the image for a long time. Then he closed the app and didn't open it again. He had community service to finish. He had his kids to see. He had therapy to attend and a job to find and a life to rebuild, knowing that some people would always see him as the man who trapped a woman in adhesive. Knowing that Karen would always see herself as the woman who turned victimhood into a platform. And knowing, deep down, that neither of them would ever fully understand what they'd done to each other. Some stories don't have neat endings. Some stories just stop, leaving everyone involved to figure out what comes next, carrying the weight of their choices like an invisible adhesive they can't quite wash away.